Welcome back to another episode of the Dad's Making a Difference podcast. Today, I am having a conversation with Scott Maderer. Scott is on a mission. He's on a mission to help men live in alignment with the way that they use their time, their talents, and their treasures so that they can identify and live a fully authentic life that allows them to live your calling, serve others, and provide for your family. And today on this episode, Scott is going to give you key steps that you can take right now, this week, so that you can live out your true calling and become a dad making a difference. This episode of the Dad's Making a Difference podcast with Scott Maderer starts right now. Scott, welcome to the Dad's Making a Difference podcast. Good to see you this morning.
Absolutely. I'm glad to be here.
It did take a little bit of trickery here to get us recording, but I appreciate your patience. Like you said, tech can be tech sometimes. And
tech is just tech.
Yeah, and
I'm sorry you're dealing with a head cold and not feeling 100% either. That doesn't make it easier.
But you know what, Scott? I think that means this is going to be a good one. You know, when when you're being tested by the little things, you know, there's going to be a good message that comes out of a conversation. So I just appreciate you being here to talk about time and talents and legacy for men. And yeah, I want to dive in there because you do talk lots about time and talent when it comes to men. And there's a lot of guys right now who might be struggling, one, balancing their time, finding what they're actually good at, or maybe they have this thing that they have a passion inside of them. They don't really want to take that step. So I want to dive in right there because you do coach men in doing this. And so what should guys look for, and how do you guide men through this process?
You know, it's an interesting thing because a lot of times, like you mentioned, I work with people, time, talent, and treasures. I call myself a stewardship coach. That's kind of the three areas. And most people come in and they either say, I've got a problem with time or I've got a problem with money. You know, It's exactly what you said. I know there's this thing I'm supposed to be doing, but in some way, time or money is holding me back. Now, here's the secret. I don't actually coach on time and money. I really only coach on talent because at the end of the day, time and money are the symptom. The actual problem is you. Now, here's the good news. You're also the solution. So don't panic. But it's us, right? It's the way we handle our time and the way we handle our money is actually the problem. It's not time or money. Think about time. Let's stick there. You got 24 hours in a day. Everyone has 24 hours in a day. That's it. That's all you get. 168 hours in a week. It's not the time that's the problem. It's how are you using it? How are you prioritizing it? How are you figuring out what it is that you're supposed to actually be doing with that time that matters?
Yeah. Why do you think so many dads struggle with that? Like I've met lots of guys who struggle with the "I'm so busy" comment, and we dive into that in our community. But why do you think that time stewardship is the biggest obstacle for dads? And what are a couple practical shifts they could take to remedy that a little bit this week?
So first off, you're right. It's a huge problem. And dads, people that are in relationships, we almost always struggle with it. And there's a couple of reasons. One is just the volume of the world today. And I use the word volume on purpose because there's a million things screaming at you for your attention, for your time, your work, your relationships, your kids, your this, your that. The lawn has to be mowed. All of these things are coming at you. And they almost all seem to be of equal importance. We have this idea that all of these things are important. And when everything is important, then nothing's important.
Yeah.
Because you haven't really prioritized your life. You haven't sat back and said, wait. What is the priority? And by the way, notice I made priority singular, not plural.
Yeah.
Because a lot of us say priorities. Technically, the word means the one thing that comes before all others. How can you have more than one thing? And yet we make that word plural. We're like, I got lots of priorities. No, you don't. You have one. Now, you may have a second priority that comes after that one. You can hierarchy, you can put them in a list. And when you start doing that, then that lets you step back. And so this is the tip for you. You said earlier, the busy. And by the way, busy nowadays has become a badge of honor, right? Somebody walks up to you, how you doing, man? Oh, I'm busy. That's our knee-jerk response. It's either I'm okay, which is really a nice way of saying, please leave me alone and don't talk to me, or it's I'm busy. That's kind of the two answers we give. Busy simply means getting a lot of stuff on your plate. It doesn't actually mean putting the right stuff on your plate. I'll prove that to you. I can hire you right now to go in my backyard, and I've got a pile of rocks on one side of my yard. And I want you to pick up the rocks, one rock at a time, and carry it to the other side of the yard and put it in a pile. And when you've moved all the rocks, I want you to just pick up the rocks from that pile and move them back to the first pile. Okay. And just all day long, moving rocks all day long. And I could pay you $100 a day or $1,000 a day, $10,000 a day. At some point you would be like, I got enough money now. I'm not doing this anymore. This is not, that's busy though. You'd be busy, but you wouldn't have any purpose. You wouldn't have any value. So here's the tip. You're no longer allowed to say, I don't have time for that. I don't have time to go to my daughter's soccer game. I don't have time to go on date night with my wife. I don't have time to do that. Instead, you have to say it this way. That's not a priority for me. Stop and think for a minute. Because if let's face it, you're at work, your coworker's sitting there, you're typing away, you're doing your work, you're staying late. They're like, hey, I thought you were heading out at 5. I'm just too busy to make it to my daughter's soccer game. They're going to go, oh, I'm so sorry. It's how hard it is to be you. You're just too busy to do that. But if you looked at your coworker and you said, well, it's not a priority to make it to my daughter's soccer game, your coworker would slap you upside the head and be like, dude, get out of here. Go to your daughter's soccer game. That's a priority. Obviously, go. Because it changes the way you think about it. And it would change the way you think about it. So all of a sudden, when you say that, you get that icky feeling and you'd be like, no, I'm signing off work and go to the soccer game. That's more important. It lets you start seeing that hierarchy that I'm talking about. So now all of a sudden, you know what? If the lawn doesn't get mowed this weekend and it has to wait till next weekend and it gets a little tall, oh, well, that's not the most important thing for me right now. That doesn't get done today. I don't feel bad about it. I don't have that guilt about it.
Yeah. I love that. The language we use is important.
Absolutely.
And one of the things I'll say to the guys in our community is like, there's a difference between being busy and being productive.
Absolutely.
And it's okay to be productive in a shorter amount of time and get the same task done. And people look at you and say, how do they must not be doing their job correctly. They must not be spending enough time with their family because they're able to do all these things. And it's just discipline. And it's being really intentional about the priority, like you said, instead of the priorities that you have on that whiteboard in your office and say, oh, I have to do all these things. I have a question about aligning that priority with what's important to you, because I think this is something that comes back, right? Is men will say, I feel like something's off. So either their work, their family life, their faith, their finances, something's out of alignment and they're not quite sure why, because they're doing their best. I prioritized this thing, but I still feel like I'm all over the place. What signs could a guy look for that something is out of alignment with the feeling they might have or indicators they might have in their life? And what would be like one step they could take to self-correct that?
I think the biggest indicator, it's exactly what you just said. You have that strange feeling inside that things are out of alignment. Things aren't lining up. It's the, I make too much money to feel this broke, or, I have too many things that are important to me right now, and I'm letting too much on my plate. So it just doesn't feel right anymore. Mm-hmm. And this isn't about, by the way, feel here is an interesting word, because it's not about feeling, quote, good or bad. It's about feeling in alignment. The word you use is the perfect word. It's things are lining up, because guess what? The laundry still has to get washed. The lawn still has to get mowed. There's always going to be something that you're going to have to do. And it's just like, yeah, I just got to suck it up and do it. It's not my favorite part of the day, but whatever it is. Now, I actually like mowing the lawn, but there are people that hate it, right? Yeah. So it's it's not about it feels good. It's about it feels right. It feels in alignment. It feels like it's the right things to do. So here's a couple of things that you can do. One, learn this really powerful word. So everybody say it with me. Put the tongue against the roof of your mouth and go, no. By the way, that's a complete sentence. There's a period at the end of that sentence. You don't have to say no because blah, 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 blah. You can just say no. Because a lot of times what gets us out of alignment isn't what we're saying yes to. It's what we're not saying no to. It's the don't do list. Because we all have a to-do list. How many of you have a don't do list?
Right.
I actually do, right? I have a list of things that it's like, I don't care if the opportunity comes along or not. I'm just going to say no to that. Because it's not something that I've learned over time. It's something I've tried, something I've done because maybe I was called to do it, but it's not in alignment with who I'm made to be. It doesn't feed my soul. It doesn't give me energy. It doesn't add value to me and to others. And when I do it, I'm just doing it because I have to. That's not what I was put on earth to do.
Yeah.
So instead I pivot and I go, I'm going to say no to that thing. But then what that does is it opens up the time to say yes to this stuff over here, which is actually the stuff that I was put on the planet to do, and those are the things that feed my soul and feed my relationships and bring about purpose and meaning. Now, again, truth be told, I'm going to step back and be transparent and honest. Guess what? Two things happen. One, imposter syndrome will show up, or those limiting beliefs will show up, and they always do. And they'll start telling you, oh, this isn't really what you're supposed to do. This isn't really what you'll have those doubts. And it's a constant journey of discovery to uncover and learn, not really to overcome those things. It's not a battle. People always talk about, beat your limiting beliefs. I actually think it's more like this. You learn to dance with them. You learn to live in a relationship with them where it's like, it's going to show up, but that's okay. It's almost like an old friend showing up and it's like, oh, there you are again. And let's just kind of work through that and dance through that. That's that pit in the stomach when you do that public speaking event that for the first time and you're like, oh my goodness, I can't do that. Yeah, you can dance with it. Don't be fight against it. Just learn to live with it in a relationship. And as you begin to do that and learn to dance with those things, now all of a sudden your journey, because you've given yourself the power of choice. You've given yourself the ability to say no to something and say yes to something and choose what you allow into your circle, into your life. And when you recognize that power of choice, all of a sudden things really open up.
Yeah. I love that. We get trapped in this busyness cycle by the have tos, by the things that people are putting on our plate that we could say no to, but we don't. Right. And what happens is we start to eliminate the margin in our lives where we get to actually have agency and say over the things that are important to us. And we start to have our day dictated by other people, by another schedule. And I think really the turning point for a lot of guys is when they take control of their schedule, they do the priority, they find the alignment, and they say no. I'm so glad that you said that because it's the hardest word for a guy to say.
It is really hard.
because I find that husbands and fathers especially feel that they have to say yes to so many things to prove that they can do it, to prove that I'm able, I am capable. Look what I do for others. Look what I do for my family. And they fear that saying no is selfish, right?
There's a difference between being selfish and taking care of yourself.
Right.
And there's a difference between being selfish and saying no. Selfish, again, let's go back to that. If you made your life so busy that now all of a sudden you're not at your daughter's soccer game, dude, that's selfish. That would be selfish. And yet everyone around you would look at you and go, look at all the work you do. Oh, how great you are. Yeah, well, you'll be great on the way to a divorce and, joint custody with the kiddo because it's not going to work long term because you've gotten things out of alignment. We're back to that word of alignment. And I loved what you said about have to, because I literally, one of the things I do when I'm working with folks as a coach is I say, you have to remove those words from your language. You cannot say I have to. You have to say I chose to. And boy, people hate that. They really don't want to say that. But that's the truth, because let's make it really extreme for a minute. You know, if I broke in your house and I put a gun to your head, and I mean, yes, I know this is extreme. And I said, no matter, you have to do this. There is something I could put in that sentence and you'd go, dude, you're just going to have to shoot me. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to do that.
Yeah.
Now, there are other things that you'd go, absolutely, I'll do that. No problem. My life is worth more than that thing. But there are some things, and a lot of us, for dads, it's our family, right? It's like, if I suddenly said you're going to have to do something to your kid or your wife, you'd be like, dude, you're just going to have to shoot me. It's not going to happen. And that's because we instinctively, internally, we have that hierarchy. We have that line. We have those things where we're like, I ain't choosing that one. But when you say you have to, you're abdicating your authority, you're abdicating your power. And someone out there is hearing right now, but I work at I'm a corporate, guy. I work in a cubicle, and somebody does dictate my schedule. No, they don't. Okay. They do because you allow them to, but believe it or not, you have more control over than you think. I literally, at one point in my corporate career, and I was 11 years in corporate and worked myself up into senior leadership and all that, I had all this stuff coming to me where I'd have to work like 80 hours a week. And literally, I wrote down everything that was on my list to do. And I walked into my boss and I said, okay, this is the list you've given me. This is the amount of time I have. Yeah. What comes off the list? Because something has to, tell me what's most important to you. Which of these things are the most important for you for me to get done? Well, that one. Okay. What else? Well, that one. Okay. What else? And we eventually ended up with a list that was much more manageable. Now, it was still 50, 60 hours a week for a while until I built systems and processes and got it down. But I brought it back down to where all of a sudden I was working 40 hours a week, and everybody else that was in the comparable position to me was working 80. Wow. And it's back to what you were saying, where people are looking over at me going, dude, how do you get all of that done in this amount of time? And it's like, well, first off, I figured out what was actually important. So some of the stuff that's not important, I'm not putting that first or second on my list, and nobody's noticed, because nobody actually cares about that thing, and y'all are still killing yourself to get it done, and nobody cares. So it is this ability to, even in a place where you feel like you have no control, do exactly what you said and own the things that you can own, make the choices that you do have, and be extreme about it sometimes, and do those things that nobody else is willing to do. And all of a sudden, you'll discover you've got a lot more power and choice than you believe you do.
That's right. You mentioned corporate and guys who feel that, well, I need to do this and I have to do this. And a lot of what we're talking about right now are the actions that we take, like the things that we do. I'm going to shift a little bit based on what you were just sharing to the mental side of this, because that's a barrier for a lot of guys too. Many dads feel the pressure to chase success. But that often comes at the cost of their family and of their relationships. How do you guide men to move from a success-driven mindset to one that's focused on significance?
Well, and a lot of it comes down to words, right? We're back to vocabulary. First off, is defining what success actually is to you. It is success having a lot of money in the bank. Most men will look at you and go, well, no, I mean, I want enough money to provide for my family. That's important, but it's not about, some magic number, right? It's really actually stepping back and figuring out what's the emotion behind that. Why do you want money in your bank? Well, most people don't actually want money. They want freedom, or they want flexibility, or they want the ability to, provide experiences for their family and do things, provide, right? That's a big word for a lot of us as men, is we're a good provider. Yeah. The money is a tool. The provision is what you're after. And when you start realizing that, and realizing that that's the emotion that you're after, that's the feeling, then you can start shifting, and you can start recognizing that success isn't about having more. It's about having enough. It's about having the right amount. It's not about doing more. It's not about having more. It's not about achieving more. It's about the feelings that you get. And yeah, that's tough for men, because we don't like to admit that we've got feelings and all of that sort of, guess what you do, just suck it up and admit it. And once you realize that, then you can start stepping back, and you can actually measure success with exactly what you're talking about, significance, which is not significance isn't brought on alone. It isn't brought on with a scorecard. It's brought on in relationship. It's brought on with others. You're in a corporate job, you're in a senior position. Okay, it's your team's success is what measures your success, not yours. It's the
Right.
team's.
Right.
You're in a relationship. It's no longer just about you. It's about you and the person you're in a relationship. You got a kid. It's no longer just about you. And that, by the way, a lot of times having a kid is the trigger for a lot of us as men, where all
Yeah.
of a sudden it's like, oh, dude, I actually have to grow up now. I can't be a selfish kid anymore because I've got a kid. And
Yeah.
those triggering events is when we realize it isn't about the measures of success that the world puts out there and that so often we put upon ourselves. It's really about stepping back and going, what's the driver behind it? What am I actually after?
Yeah.
I'm after something else. And it's usually something that has to do with a feeling, not a number in your bank account.
Yeah. What a journey for someone to go on, to be able to open themselves up and be vulnerable enough to just sit back and say, like, what is that feeling I'm looking for? What is the feeling I have right now that's going to push me to make a change in my life and in my priority and in the alignment of what's important to me? I'm curious because there's a lot of people out there who do, here's the best, here's the perfect day, here's my formula for owning your time, all that. But for you in your journey, what was because you haven't done this forever. Like you mentioned, you were in corporate, you've done other
Mm-hmm.
work. What was your like wake up moment? What did you experience that you were like, this is it? This is the direction that I'm going. This is going to lead me in this mission of coaching and teaching and helping others. What was it for you?
For me, my wife and I went through a big financial disaster in our life where we had a lot of problems. And because of that, and a lot of men will hear themselves in this, I was actually suicidal because of financial challenges that we were facing. My wife and I nearly got divorced because of it. We had a lot going on. And I actually stepped back and was listening to some things. My wife was listening to things. We weren't talking. I was being a good man and I was protecting her from everything and not telling her what was going on. By the way, she's a smart lady. She knew what was going on.
Yeah.
But I wasn't, we weren't talking about it. And finally it got to a point where I'm like, this is not going to work. We're either getting divorced, I'm dying, or something's got to change. And I sat down and was vulnerable enough to talk to her and say, I can't do this anymore. I can't carry this burden by myself. And here's what's going on. And of course she went, yeah, I know. But I'm trying to be supportive of you. And I wasn't trying to put any more pressure on you. And once we realized that we just decided to do things completely different. And in that time, I was a school teacher, and then I transitioned to the corporate job and was doing that. And in the corporate job, very quickly, I was making, very six-figure plus kind of money. And I'm driving a 1999 Ford with, like 200 and something thousand miles on it. The headliner is like falling off and hitting me in the
Yeah.
head as I'm driving into work. And people are looking at me going, dude, you can go drive, buy a new Mercedes. And I'm like, yeah, that's not important to me.
Right.
And we're doing this stuff. And we revamped our life. And then literally what happened is we fell into the coaching because people started going, you're weird. Can you help me be weird? Because something's weird about y'all. Y'all are doing something really different. And when they started asking for help, we started as a ministry. We started through our church and through others. And then that kind of grew. And then it's like, well, hey, this could be a business. And I started doing it part-time. And so I'd climbed up the corporate ladder and then started this coaching business on the side. And then I literally climbed back down the corporate ladder to launch the coaching business as a full-time business. And so honestly, all along this journey, it was discovering pieces of my call. And I'll tell you, I don't think I'm finished. I don't think you ever really finish. I think you just keep uncovering new layers and new pieces and new dynamics. I wrote a book now and it's like, okay, that's now part of it. That I never thought that would be part of it. It is, those sorts of things where you just keep discovering layers. So I think that's one of the mistakes that we make is we try to look for our calling as if it's the destination, when I really think our calling comes out of the journey.
Yes. Yeah, I love that. In our community, we talk a lot about growth, about just committing to growth. And yes, in the like growth mindset piece, but not so much Carol Dweck growth mindset stuff, but just like the idea that this process, that everything we do, every step we take is in order for us to grow, for us to learn, for us to change something, to add a stimulus that makes us a little bit uncomfortable so that we can push through it, because that's when we grow. And so we talk about those types of things. So I love that. And thank you for sharing that, because for you in that journey of like school teacher to corporate, up the ladder, down the ladder, coaching, I'm sure through every single one of those transitions, it wasn't easy. I'm sure, right? Like, and often the most beneficial and valuable things in our lives aren't the easy things. And so, what encouragement do you have to guys who are listening to this right now who might be on the brink of at the top of that ladder, looking down, being like, I worked so hard to get here, but I know the right thing is to climb down?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Again, it comes back to recognizing the power that you have. And it's that power of choice. No one else gets to dictate to you what your purpose is. That's between you and, I'm a person of faith. I believe it's between me and God. Whatever language you want to put it in, I don't care. It's this idea that calling, really the word that we use for that is vocation, which isn't the same as career. Our career is the thing we do to make money. It's the word for cart comes from, the word for career comes from the word for cart, something that gets you from point A to point B. That's all your career is. So if you're finding your meaning only in, quote, what you do, realize it's deeper than that. It's bigger than that. It touches other components of your life. It may show up in something that has nothing to do with what you get paid to do. That's okay. By the way, it doesn't mean, because everyone is always like, oh, find your purpose and then go do that for money. And, you'll never work a day in your life. That's not true for all of us. Some people go over here and do a career, a 9-to-5 that has nothing to do with their purpose, but they use that as the fuel and the energy and the money and the things that then allow them to go over here and do something that's totally in alignment with their purpose. Okay, that may be how you discover it. That may be how it works for you. In my case, my career and my purpose are more in alignment today, but I don't think that has to be that way. And it's when we sit down and we look at it and we go, this is the way, again, we're back to that have to language, right? This is the way it has to be. This is the way that my boss expects it to be, my wife expects it to be, my society expects it to be, whatever. Now we're putting that on us. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying go out and just be wild and do whatever you want. That's not the point. It's about recognizing that those relationships, those dynamic periods of figuring it out, like you said, that's the growth. The growth doesn't come whenever you're doing something just because you feel like you have to. The growth comes when you give yourself that power to say, no, I'm going to choose to do the thing, not because it's easy, but because it's not easy. I'm going to choose to do the thing, not because everyone else thinks I should do it, but because I know deep in my heart, my soul, this is right for me, right for my family, right for the purpose that I'm put on this planet to do. And yeah, everyone else is going to, by the way, when I left a multi-6-figure, corporate job to go launch a bit, how many people looked at me and went, dude, you're crazy.
Yeah.
You are leaving the dream job to go do this. Like, yeah, but it's not my dream. It's your dream. Great. Go do the job, but it's not my dream, and it's okay for me to go live my dream and do these things. Now I'm still doing it in a way where I provide for my family. And, trust me, my wife loves it a lot more that my commute's 30-second, and I'm not on a plane all the time. But it's recognizing that and working with that choice that you have and wrestling with it. And, I like the phrase dancing with it, because the truth is, limiting beliefs, fear, imposter syndrome, all of those stuff, people ask me, when do you deal with imposter syndrome? I'm like, on days that end in Y. The rest of the days I'm fine. We deal with it all the time. I was teaching to a group of entrepreneurs, 500 of them, the men and women, multi-6-figure businesses, every outside trapping of success that you could think of, right? These were all people that the world would all look at and say, you are successful people. You have got it made. I said, how many of you have an inner voice? Every hand went up. I said, how many of you does that inner voice, how many of you is that inner voice nice to you? Put your hand, keep your hand up if it's nice to you. And every hand went down. Nobody's nice to themselves, and these are successful people. Why? Because we all have that thing, that battle that we have to battle against. And it's different for different ones of us. For me, it was finances. For somebody else, it's health, it's their weight, it's a cancer diagnosis, it's whatever it is. We all have those things that we have to learn to battle against and work through and dance with, that don't ever really go away. They're always there.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing. Man, like for you right now in this chapter, in this season of your life, what's something that you are excited about or diving into that's part of your growth process?
For me, a lot of it is around the coaching, and
Mhm.
the reason why is, it's a process, not an event. I jokingly say I'd love to go back to the first people that hired me as a coach and apologize to them, because it's like, oh man. Truth is, though, I actually gave value to them and I did a great job. It's just I would do a better job today.
Right.
That's probably good, right?
Yeah.
Because honestly, if I was still at the same level I was, back in 2011, back in 2012, that would be so great, wouldn't it?
Right.
So, for instance, I'm part of a group called Coach Connections. We train people on financial coaching. I'm the head instructor for that. I'm kind of the guy that runs their orientation and training program. For me, that's awesome, because I get, every twice a year, I get 30, 40, 20 people that come through, and I have to run through the training and all of the basics again. And people are like, doesn't that get boring? I'm like, Lord, no, because
Yeah.
every time I go through it with a different group of people, somebody asks a question, somebody shares something, and it's like, that's brand new. I've never thought of that. This
Yeah.
is brand new. It's working with my clients where, I have that moment where the client asks a question. It's like, okay, that's a new one. I haven't had that one before. Let's figure that out. Let's start asking questions. Let's figure that out. And just that recognition that I don't have to have all the answers. I don't have to be the perfect person. I don't have to be everything's figured out. Because it's really about that journey. For me, that's the growth moment.
Mm.
And because of that, they come from everything. They come,
Yeah.
I get it at church. I get it when I'm talking to my wife. I get it when I'm talking to a coaching client. I get it at all moments, because that's the focus that you have. And when you put the focus there, all of a sudden you see those growth moments showing up.
Yeah. Amazing. Scott, if there's a guy listening to this right now and they want to learn more about you and connect with you and pick up your book, where can they do that?
Absolutely. So I actually put together a landing page just for your listeners. So if you go over to my website, which is inspiredstewardship.com, and then just /dads, DADS, it'll take you to a page that it's got a place that you can get a hold of me. It's got some free resources. So if you're working on time, I actually can give you some free resources and some tools to use for that, some exercises to do. It's got information about my book, my own podcast, the Inspired Stewardship Podcast, and more. So again, you can find all of that over at inspiredstewardship.com /dads.
Excellent. Scott, thank you so much for taking time today away from the other things in your life that are the priority. And so we appreciate you and appreciate your time. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.